Welcome back. We're going to do 1 Samuel chapter 30 today. Let's go ahead and pray and we will get started. Father in heaven, we humble ourselves before you. Thank you for the opportunity to study your word. Thank you for all our provision. And even though many of us sense there are hard things coming in the future, Father, we have a mostly peaceful day today in this country. And we thank you for that. We thank you for all your years of provision, for all your guidance and shepherding. Thank you that we still have easy access to the Bible and that we can know you better by studying it. Thank you for revealing yourself to us. Father, we pray that we would be humble before you and honor you and glorify you. And Father, I pray that you would grant an extra blessing to those who are viewing this, who are taking time out of their day to study your word. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, so we're in 1 Samuel chapter 30. And where we left off, so David's been on the run, right? He's been on the run from Saul for a number of years, and he's been down with the Philistines for 1 year and 4 months, hiding out, been attacking certain other peoples, Canaanite peoples in southern Judah to bide his time, and he's accumulating wealth by doing that, but he's telling the Philistines he's doing it to Judah. So the Philistines have thought that he was, or at least the king of Gath, thought that David is becoming an ally and traitor to Saul. But David was not truthful in that. And then he and his 600 men went up to try to do battle, like the Philistines are going to battle against King Saul on Mount Gilboa. And David took his men and was going to go fight alongside the Philistines, and we're most certain that he was going to turn on the Philistines in the middle of the battle because we've already seen David was not willing to set his hand against the Lord's anointed. And I would assume that would include the armies of the Lord, given what he said when he fought Goliath. Beyond that, there's no way he would want to come up against Jonathan in battle and have to fight him or attack him. So most certainly he was going to turn on the Philistines, in the middle of the battle. And hopefully reconcile himself to Saul that way. And the other kings of the Philistines perceived this was true. So they were kind of mad at the king of Gath and saying, hey, we don't trust this guy. Why are you trusting this guy? Send him back to that city you gave him. And so David and his men leave. And the city that the king of Gath gave David was a formerly Jewish city from Judah named Ziklag. And so David is now returning to Ziklag with his 600 men while the Philistines are going up to do battle against King Saul. So this is where we start. Now it happened when David and his men came to Ziklag on the third day that the Amalekites had invaded the south, and Ziklag attacked Ziklag and burned it with fire. Now, when it says invaded the south, you should understand that in Hebrew that's, I believe that's the word Negev, which is the southern part of Israel. Like you can look at Israel today, and the Negev is that southern little peak area next to the Sinai. So the Amalekites had invaded the Negev and Ziklag and attacked Ziklag and burned it with fire, and had taken captive the women and those who were there from small to great. They did not kill anyone, but carried them away and went their way. Okay. So we're going to see this is not a small band of Amalekites, because they carried away successfully over 600 women and many more children and servants to boot. They overcame the city and took that many away, David and his men being gone. And this wasn't the only city that they attacked. So they attacked, and we're going to see they had servants with them too. So this must have been a fairly large army. It must have been thousands, It had to be thousands, and we'll see it had to be thousands. But they were attacking multiple cities and villages down there. Now we're seeing kind of why people back then had walls around their cities, right? Because at the same time, the Philistines are going up to attack Saul, and David's been out raiding these villages in the south before that. The Amalekites are coming in and raiding. It's a wonder anybody ever had time to plant anything with all this raiding and warring going on. But what's interesting is it's not done for murderous purposes necessarily. Although in David's case, they were annihilating to make sure there was no talking, and they were fulfilling the command of God to eliminate the Canaanites. But for the Amalekites' perspective, they were wanting wealth. Okay, they're after the flocks of sheep, goats, any cattle, donkeys, oxen, tools, you name it, any kind of loot they can get, they're raiding it, and they want the women. They want the women, and the children will become slaves. So, and this isn't new. I mean, the Amalekites have been doing this from day one. This is who they are. They're basically raiding nomads. And even to modern day almost, where we see that Muhammad, the founder of Islam, was an Amalekite. The Meccans are from Amalek. And that's how Islam started, was his raiding bands that would raid places and force them to become Muslim. That's how he built his Islamic empire. So, by the way, David, Ziklag means, the meaning is a little bit debated, but I would go with, once again, Abarim Publications has, I think, the best analysis of it. And it has to do with liquid metal, and would seem to point to the fact that Ziklag was a place where blacksmithing was done. This was connected to the nascent iron technology that was that Israel was beginning to do. They weren't allowed to have blacksmiths under the Philistines before King Saul, but now they are. And Ziklag is basically a forge, most likely. It's a forge city with numerous blacksmiths. And yet the meaning of the name then alludes to, we've seen previously in the land of Ziph, etc. It was kind of a dark and gloomy. Those names had to do with depression, gloominess, darkness. En Gedi, where he, fled for a time, was, the mountain goats, and this was kind of speaking of this phase of his fleeing from Saul, where he was just nimble and escaping and, couldn't be stopped, clinging to the sides of impossible slopes. But now Ziklag is indicating a forge. So this is perhaps just a symbolic allusion to the fact that David is being forged. His men and he are being forged into the final shape that he needs to take in order to become king. And we are seeing him act more and more kingly. He wasn't ready to be king before, even though God anointed him. God knows when we're ready for what. And even if he's destined us for something specific, he knows how to shepherd us and forge us and get us ready. And sometimes we may try to take those things too early or try to fulfill our destiny too early. And David refused to do that. And that's part of the reason he was a man after God's own heart. So David and his men came to the city, and there it was, burned with fire, and their wives, their sons, and their daughters had been taken captive. So this is interesting. The Amalekites didn't kill anybody. They took everybody captive. I would not have expected that, but that's in God's providence. That's what he inspired them to do. Then David and the people who were with him lifted up their voices and wept until they had no more power to weep. So they're not immediately riding off. They're just destroyed, grieving. They think it's over. They lost their all 600 men lost their families, all their wealth, Their homes are burned. This is not a good thing to come home to. I mean, if, you know, a bunch of men went off to war to fight in the American military somewhere, and they all came back to their neighborhood. Let's say they all had houses in this neighborhood, and they get there, and all the houses are burned. Their families are all gone, taken prisoner by a superior force with more soldiers, and who knows what's happening to the wives, and perhaps they think they're gonna be killed shortly. And your bank accounts are empty to boot, almost. That would be quite devastating. And they wept until they had no more power to weep. And David's two wives, Ahinoam, the Jezreelitess, and Abigail, the widow of Nabal the Carmelite, had been taken captive. So David's two wives were taken captive as well. David's suffering along with his people. Now David was greatly distressed, for the people spoke of stoning him, because the soul of all the people was grieved, every man for his sons and his daughters. But David strengthened himself in the Lord his God. So David is distressed. The people that, these men are upset. They want to blame somebody. It's like, David, you're the one who made us ride off to help the Philistines, who are our enemies. And now look what happened. Is this God's reward? God is punishing us for, even riding up with the Philistines. Or he's punishing us for all these raids we've been doing. They don't care. They're not rational. They've lost everyone, including their families, and they don't think they can get them back. So they want to kill somebody. And David's the natural outlet. It says, but David strengthened himself in the Lord. So when you're facing a crisis, when everybody seems to be against you, let's do this. Let's do what David did and strengthen ourselves in the Lord. Meaning, he spent time with God. He went off and said, okay, I'm going to go pray. I'm going to go spend time with God, like I did when I was a shepherd. And that's how he renewed his strength. I want to point out that what David experienced here is literally what the people of Israel just experienced on October 7th. The enemies of Israel invaded southern Israel, attacked the very same communities, many of the same communities that were attacked here by these Amalekites. And the ones who attacked Israel on October 7th last year were spiritually Amalekites. Even the airplane mode again. Even if they were physically Philistines, spiritually, they're Muslims, which means they're the spiritual descendants of Amalek, of Muhammad. So on October 7th of last year, the Amalekites invaded southern Israel again and burned it with fire and took captives again. In fact, less captives were taken last October 7th than were taken here. Because these men, we had like 200 and something captives taken on October 7th. But here we have wives of every man plus their children. So this would be more than 600, it'd be in the thousands. Now, October 7th, we had thousands killed and a couple hundred taken captive. By the way, it was great news the other day when 4 hostages were freed by the Israeli Defense Forces. That was great news. Hope you saw that. But anyway, I'm just pointing out that David, today we're living out a lot of the same patterns. The Bible is repeating itself. These aren't new things that are happening. David went through what Israel is going through today. But David strengthened himself in the Lord his God, and Israel, the modern nation of Israel, would do good to do the same thing. And for that matter, so would the United States of America. We should humble ourselves and repent. The modern nation of Israel, though, is only partially turning to God so far. There is a large messianic movement that is growing in Israel where many Jews are becoming followers of Yeshua, of Christ, but not enough. And there are far too many secular Jews in Israel who do not remember their God and refuse to repent. All right, let's get back to the text. So in verse 7, then David said to Abiathar the priest, Ahimelech's son, remember, Abiathar escaped and came to be with David. He said, please bring the ephod here to me. And Abiathar brought the ephod to David. So David inquired of the Lord, saying, shall I pursue this troop? Shall I overtake them? So again, the ephod with the Urim and the Thummim were the method that these lots that they would cast in order to discern the will of God. And so this is one of the main ways that the king or people would inquire of the Lord, is going to the high priest and asking him to ask God something. And then the way these lots would fall, we don't know exactly how the Urim and the Thummim worked. But it would, God would communicate. They believed he would communicate to them through it. And according to Scripture, this seems to be a legitimate way that God would communicate. And he answered him, God answered him, pursue, for you shall surely overtake them, and without fail recover all. So God is telling David, yep, go ahead, you're going to catch them, and you're going to get everything back. No worries. So David went, he and the 600 men who were with him, and came to the brook Besor, where those stayed who were left behind. But David pursued, he and 400 men, for 200 stayed behind, who were so weary that they could not cross the brook Besor. So, we'll get to the meaning. Sorry, the meaning of the name brook. Well, we'll go ahead and say it now. This is just a small little creek, place of water. There's 200 men who are too tired. Why would they be so tired? Well, they're riding at full gallop. They're riding at full speed. Actually, I'm not sure they had horses here, but they're running at full speed. They're trying to catch up to the Amalekites. And they've just come from where the Philistines were up in more mid to northern Israel, getting ready to fight against Saul. So they just got done with that journey, and now they're running after the Amalekites even further. So you got 200 men who basically are out of energy, and like, we just can't. And I have no doubt the 400 men were grumbling and thought much less of them at that point. Knowing men, they would have written these guys off, and they would have had no excuse for them. Said they're not even willing to go fight. Now we're going to lose a third of our forces. They don't care enough about their wife and their wives and children to push forward. Now, they are carrying a bunch of supplies. So these 200 men are going to stay with the supplies, and this is going to free up the 400 men to go on. And what's the value of, there is a value in these 200 staying to guard the supplies so no one else can raid them in case there's another band of Amalekites, or who knows who else is out there. And that would include, any well, I don't know exactly what was been in their supplies, but it would have been, slowing them down, their packs. So now they're freed up to run better. I was imagining these guys on horses, but I don't think they had horses. We don't see reference to that. Perhaps they did. I don't know. No, I really don't think so. No, from this passage. I don't believe we have any reference to horses anywhere in this book for the Israelites. I don't think they had that kind of wealth yet. Anyways, the meaning of the word besor is it can mean two things. It can mean place of flesh or place of good tidings. And this is really going to be both. So the first meaning is seen here as these 200 men are staying behind because they're giving into their flesh. They just can't keep going. But it's also going to become the brook of good tidings when David and his men return victorious from overcoming the Amalekites, as God said they would, and they bring back spoil. That's going to be great news. So the brook Besor is fulfilling both meanings. Then they found an Egyptian in the field and brought him to David. And they gave him bread, and he ate, and they let him drink water. And they gave him a piece of cake of figs and 2 clusters of raisins. So when he had eaten, his strength came back to him, for he had eaten no bread nor drunk water for 3 days and 3 nights. Then David said to him, "To whom do you belong, and where are you from?" And he said, "I am a young man from Egypt, servant of an Amalekite, and my master left me behind, because 3 days ago I fell sick. We made an invasion of the southern area of the Kerethites in the territory which belongs to Judah, and of the southern area of Caleb, and we burned Ziklag with fire." Okay, so he's this guy is not an Amalekite; he's an Egyptian. Probably in some point in the past, he was taken prisoner by the Amalekites and ended up becoming a slave of one of them. And he's explaining that this band of Amalekites was raiding all of the southern area below Judah. He's saying that they've hit the cities belonging to 2 groups of people, the Kerethites and the southern territory of Judah, specifically Caleb. So the southern area of Caleb, that is referring to Carmel, Ziph, Maon, that area where David had been hiding out a lot, where his wife Abigail was from. And then there's other cities there in Judah. And then the Kerethites were a little bit further south. And who were the Kerethites? Well, going forward, we're going to see that a number of the men that were with David were Kerethites. Another group is called the Pelethites. And these essentially became the special forces of Israel going forward. But they most likely are not Jewish or Israelite. Some have speculated they were, but it does not seem like that. Because it says, we made an invasion of the southern area of the Kerethites in the territory which belongs to Judah, as if it's singling them out. And most scholars, as not being from Judah itself, most scholars, they could be. The name can mean outcasts. It can mean outcasts. So these could be, some have said that these are like actual Israelites who were cast out of the rest of Judah for some reason. Many people, though, the etymology or the linguistic, order of these letters, Kereth or Keret, is the same as the island of Crete. And so most believe that they've come from the island of Crete, and they kind of emigrated, were outcast from the island of Crete, and were living in southern Israel. Some people think the Philistines were from Crete. I personally think that they were from an area in Egypt, in the kind of north of Sinai. Wherever they were, most likely not actually Israelites, but they were outcast from somewhere, so they could have been. Either way, David is closely connected to them, and they've helped. A number of them have joined his band of 600. These are some of the outcasts that came to join him when he was been on the run from Saul. So they have cities here in this area too. So this guy's telling him, yeah, we attacked a lot of these towns. We burned Ziklag specifically. Now they seem to be treating this guy pretty nice. Well, like they're giving him drink, and as distraught as they are, they're like taking their time. Here, have some figs. Have a cake of figs. Have 2 clusters of raisins. Um, why are they being so patient? Well, if the guy's not had anything to eat or drink for 3 days and nights, he is definitely struggling. He's almost dead. If he hasn't drunk any water for 3 days, it's amazing he's not dead. So he's probably completely out of it. Probably found him delirious, maybe not even conscious, not sure. They brought him around enough to get him some water, but he would have been like in no shape to really talk or endure any kind of hard conversation. So it's just very these guys aren't like just, oh, poor guy. No, they really don't care so much about this guy, but he's very fragile. He's the only source of information they may have, and they need him to wake up and be able to help them. So they're trying to nurture him back, to get him back up to strength, so he can actually talk and help them, guide them possibly. So David is asking him and saying, "Can you take me down to this troop?" So he said, "Swear to me by God that you will neither kill me nor deliver me into the hands of my master, and I will take you down to this troop." So here he's saying, look, as long as if you promise not to kill me, I'll take you to him. But he also says, as long as you promise not to give me back to my master. Like as a negotiation or something, I guess. Like he's thinking David might go down and threaten and say, hey, we'll give you your slave back too, as part of some negotiation. But David has no intention of doing that. And that also reveals the Egyptian really didn't want to be with his master. He didn't love him. He didn't have an appreciation of him. He's happy to be away from him. So anyways, in verse 16, and when he had brought him down, there they were, the Amalekites, spread out over all the land, eating and drinking and dancing, because of all the great spoil which they had taken from the land of the Philistines and from the land of Judah. Okay, so this is another indication that the Kerethites are considered part of the land of the Philistines. And there's got to be a lot of them there, because then David attacked them from twilight until evening of the next day. So he attacks them for an entire 24 hours. Now this is some energy. These guys are hyped up on adrenaline. They've marched all the way down from northern Israel. That's a long journey. They come back, are devastated emotionally to see everything, all their loved ones gone, their houses burned, wealth taken. And now they've been, and we're going again. We're going to get these guys. And then they're fighting against them for 24 hours straight, while the people, the Amalekites are attacking, are rested because they've been dancing and drinking and eating just fine. David and his men are just, we don't care. But they're, even in their exhaustion, they're winning. They attack them from twilight until evening. Not a man of them escaped. So he kills almost every single Amalekite, except 400 young men who rode on camels and fled. So there were 400 Amalekites who had camels, not horses, and got away because they were on camels. And David and them are on their feet. So David recovered all that the Amalekites had carried away, and David rescued his 2 wives. Now, notice God's timing, the way he works, his provision, how he just weaves everything together. Why is Saul about to die on Mount Gilboa, according to Samuel? The Philistines are on their way to Mount Gilboa to fight against Saul. And we know Samuel's told Saul he's going to die, he and his sons. David was trying to help the Philistines, but was probably going to betray them and help Saul. And maybe in doing so, David would have given the victory to Saul, and he wouldn't have died. And he would have held on to the kingdom. But the Philistines rejected David's offer of help. And so Saul will die. And why did Samuel say that would happen? Why was the kingdom being taken from Saul and given to David, according to God, through Samuel? Because Saul had failed to kill the Amalekites when God told him to. He spared some, including the king. And we talked about how this would play forward thousands of years to cause Israel problems even today. And so while David was going up to help Saul, he's been rejected through God's providence, and now he's fighting the Amalekites. In other words, God, while Saul is dying for not fighting the Amalekites, God is now giving David the opportunity to obey this command where Saul failed, proving once more David's worth of being king. And David does not fail. He doesn't falter. He doesn't spare one single Amalekite that he can. The only ones that escape are the ones that he's just not able to get. They escape because they're on camels. So the point is David is obedient where Saul failed. And this story is not accidental as to why David is worthy to be king. So David recovered all that the Amalekites had carried away, and David rescued his 2 wives, and nothing of theirs was lacking, either small or great, sons or daughters, spoil, or anything which they had taken from them. David recovered all. Then David took all the flocks and herds they had driven before those other livestock and said, "This is David's spoil." So they recovered all their wives, all their children, and all their flocks, all their goods. They recovered all of it, plus some, plus a lot, because these Amalekites have been raiding all these other cities too. So David's wealth and his men's wealth has just jumped quite a bit. And they're saying that all the excess, all the flocks and herds that they've gained in excess now belong to David. They're honoring him greatly. They flipped on their head. They flipped 180. They were going to stone him when they thought their wives and kids were unrecoverable. And now they're giving all the spoil to him in honor. So happy that they got their wives and kids back. So, I mean, who can measure what a fickle people will do? Now, David came to the 200 men who had been so weary that they could not follow David, whom they also had made to stay at the brook Besor. So they went out to meet David and to meet the people who were with him. And when David came near the people, he greeted them. Then all the wicked and worthless men of those who went with David answered and said, "Because they did not go with us, we will not give them any of the spoil that we have recovered, except for every man's wife and children, that they may lead them away and depart." So I'm sure these 200 guys who stayed behind felt bad and guilty. These aren't namby-pambies or whatever you want to call them. These are warriors. These guys have been fighting with David for a long time. They must have been really exhausted and just unable to keep going. And after a day's rest, they probably would have felt like, and just beating themselves up, I have no doubt. And then when the 400 men get back, there's some self-righteousness going on. The 200 are hoping for grace. They're hoping they'll say, "Hey, we did it. Don't worry about it. Here's everything." But the 400 men, well, not all of them, some wicked and worthless men, some men who are loose with their tongues, self-righteous in spirit, are saying, "Don't give them any of this spoil. Just give them their wives, give them their kids, and then tell them to leave. We're not even going to give them back their own flocks. We're going to keep everything because these guys are worthless. They didn't come with us. They gave up. They didn't fight like we did. They didn't put the effort in we did." But David said, "My brethren, you shall not do so with what the Lord has given us, who has preserved us and delivered into our hand the troop that came against us. For who will heed you in this matter? But as his part is who goes down to the battle, so shall his part be who stays by the supplies. They shall share alike." So it was from that day forward, he made it a statute and an ordinance for Israel to this day. So David is an amazing leader. Again, the opposite of Saul. Do you think Saul would have resisted the will of the 400 men that just went and fought? Can you hear what Saul would have said? He's like, "Yes, you're right. Get out of here, 200 men, you worthless." He would have agreed with them. He would have done, he said, "Yes, get out of here." He never would have stood up to them. David, however, is focused on unity. He's saying to himself, well, there is a value to defense as well as offense. We don't want to only reward offense in battle. We need to reward those who stay to defend. This is a good principle. Second, he wants unity because he's saying, he's calling these guys my brethren, and he views the 200 as his brethren. He's been walking with these guys and fighting with them for years now. And they've been faithful up until this moment. And you have to realize they wanted their wife and kids. So if they just couldn't go on, you have to think they just couldn't go on. They didn't have the stamina. But David doesn't want to write them off. And if he did, he'd have a case where you can serve with David and sacrifice and go along with him. And then one day you do the wrong thing and he's going to throw you away. That's what those 200 men would have said. That's what everybody would have understood. And while it would have created a greater fear of the king, it would have diminished the love for the king. And David has no fear standing up to his men. So different from Saul. It's like, no, he corrects them and does the opposite of whatever they're urging him to. They're always urging him to take the worldly way out, to use human wisdom. And he always says, no, we're going to do this the way the Lord wants. And he's ascribing the victory to the Lord. He's saying, this battle was given to us by God. Don't act self-righteous. Don't act like you did this in your own power. He's saying, he's basically implying that it's the Lord who gave them the strength to keep going. He's saying he gave 400 of us the strength to go forward and win. Why are you going to blame the 200 that he didn't strengthen to go? And he's saying, who will heed you in this matter? I'm not heeding you. I'm not listening to you. We're not going to do this. Be quiet. And he creates a law. And by doing so, this is extreme wisdom, great leadership, and he is reuniting. The grumblers are going to grumble a little bit, but he's basically shut them down very clearly, publicly, and finally. So if anyone continues to grumble about this situation going forward, the overwhelming majority will shut them down, and this issue is most likely done. David's not made room for it to continue. It's a strong leader. It's a good leader. Now, when David came to Ziklag, he sent some of the spoil to the elders of Judah, to his friends, saying, "Here is a present for you." So he's got friends. David is charismatic. He's got friends everywhere. "Here is a present for you from the spoil of the enemies of the Lord. To those who were in Bethel, those who were in Ramoth of the south, those who were in Jatir, those who were in Auror, those who were in Siphmoth, those who were in Eshtemoa, those who were in Rachal, those who were in the cities of Jerahmeelites, those who were in the cities of the Kenites, those who were in Hormah, those who were in Khorasan, those who were in Athach, those who were in Hebron, and to all the places where David himself and his men were accustomed to rove." So just so you know where these cities are, Bethel is the odd one, which seems to be fairly to the north, like a little bit north of Jerusalem, but it was obviously a significant city. and near Gibeah. Auror, there's two possible Auroras, and they both seem to be on the east side of the Dead Sea, which doesn't really make sense. I think that's a they're not really sure where it is. So I think that's just a misidentification. There could have been Auroras over there, but there must have been another one in southern Judah, not over there. Because all these other villages and cities are in the Negev. They're in southern Judah, around Hebron, around the area where David had been roaming. There's a few up there in the valley of Megiddo, Armageddon, the valley of Jezreel, south of the Sea of Galilee. But for the most part, these are cities in the hill country of Judah, and especially southern Judah. So why is he doing this? Well, he's got a lot of extra stuff. They recovered a lot, from weapons to money to animals from the Amalekites. They got all their loot, which was more than just what they took from Ziklag. It was what they took from all these other cities. Some of what they took was from other Judean cities that had been raided. But David has no way of knowing which stuff and how much came from which city. So he's just going to give it to the elders of Judah, to the leaders of Judah. The rest of it came from the cities of the Kerethites, and he's not returning it to them. He's returning it to Judah. This is a very smart political move on his behalf. He is following, we have two parables of Jesus are kind of seen in this story right here. The previous paragraph and now this one. The first one is Jesus told a parable about a rich man with a field, and he goes out and recruits workers and a certain hourly rate or day's wage, and they agree, and then a few hours later get some more, a few hours later get some more, keeps getting more, and the last hour of the day he gets more. And at the end of the day, he pays all of them the same. And the earlier workers are mad, like, well, I thought we were going to get more because we did all the work. And Jesus said, what is it to you if I want to be generous? You agreed to work for what you got. And that parable is seen, that the principle there is seen in when he gives an equal portion to the 200 men who stayed behind. Here, Jesus told another parable about an unfaithful steward who realized he was being found out by his master, was going to lose his job. So he started using his master's wealth to endear himself to the master's customers by canceling their accounts and lowering what they owed. And he's like, I'm going to earn myself some friends, basically. And Jesus commended him, and he said, look, the pagans, the Gentiles, know how to use unrighteous wealth to win themselves friends. So how much more should you do the same? Use wealth to endear yourself to people, is the principle. And that's what David is doing here. He's using the spoil. He could have been selfish. Saul probably would have been selfish. Saul is demanding goods and flocks and things from all of his people in taxes. David's a different kind of a king. He has gotten spoil, and he is gifting it generously to all these elders of Judah from a battle they didn't bother to fight in. They weren't even part of, that they might have been victims of. So in some way he's restoring it. In other ways he's just gifting them with what they didn't even know was coming. Complete opposite of Saul. This would have greatly endeared them to him. And while they can't know for sure if David would stay that way once he's a king, it's a good first sign. He's not demanding. He's considerate. He thinks of others more than himself. He's not keeping this for himself to build up his own wealth, because that is another way that David could have garnered respect and attention. He could have accumulated all this spoil and said, this is great, I'm really gaining some power. And then when it becomes super wealthy, keep doing these things. Now everybody has to recognize I'm king because I'm so wealthy. Nope, he's just sharing it. He is really just trusting God to put him in the office when it's time. Anyways, that is what we have here from 1 Samuel chapter 30. There is a lot to learn from this book about how to live and how to follow God. David in 1 Samuel is a great example to follow. And you can see when you really stop and put yourself in his shoes and think about what most leaders would do, and you really think it through the details, you really see what a great leader he was, and really how he trusted God, had faith in God, and waited on the Lord. Amazing self-control and humility. Anyways, let's see. So what is the lesson we want to take from this and remember? Well, I think it's that. I think it's, let's be generous, not vindictive, and just honor God with that, because generosity glorifies him, and that's ultimately what we need to be trying to do. All right, you guys have a great day, and we will see you tomorrow.